we are now on the last stretch, guys. So this is the final panel. We, as Stephen just mentioned, are talking more about what we need to be considering for the future. So where to plant your flag in the near future. And we've got a great panel to talk us through that. So we have Fred, Ian, McConnell, and Bryan. Welcome, guys. Can you all hear me?
Yes. Can you hear us?
And he can.
Fantastic. Great. So to kick off, I'd just love you guys to kind of go around and give us a little intro about yourselves. So McConnell, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And apologies for not being on video. I'm in the airport. Flights got a little bit delayed. So, but great to be here and appreciate you having us. I'm a partner at VMG Partners. We're a consumer growth equity fund that invests in really high growth entrepreneurial health and wellness focused brands. So we were started about 17 years ago based in San Francisco and have backed a number of brands kind of in and around the fitness and wellness space, including Kind, Quest Nutrition, Vega, Sunbum, and Drink Elephant, more on the personal care and beauty side. Ancient Nutrition, which is a supplement business in our portfolio now, and fitness is kind of our newest vertical for us. We invested in a brand called Solid Core about 5 or 6 months ago. So I think we were maybe the first investor to come back to in-person fitness coming out of COVID, but love the category and really love kind of partnering with and supporting brands. So excited to chat with everybody here today.
Thank you. And Bryan, do you want to take the next one?
Hello, greetings, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Hello, Ian. Hello, Fred, my colleagues and friends. Thomas, I haven't had a chance to meet you in person, but it's nice to join you here. Our businesses are varied. We have about 14 operating companies through our private equity firm, Videri Ventures, in Asia, Europe, and the Americas. As part of that portfolio, I serve as a director for Fitness 24/7 in Bangkok, Thailand, which unfortunately is closed down right now until August 2nd. I sit on the board of directors of IRSA, the Global Trade Association for the fitness industry, and also serve as the head of the Fitness Industry Technology Council. I've written and contributed to 7 books on subjects around technology, innovation, etc., and I've spoken all over the world on the topic. So it's very nice to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
Thanks, Bryan. And Fred, how about you?
Hi, and same thing. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to be with all of the panel. I know Bryan, don't know the other 2 gentlemen, but we will after this hour. And I actually am American, but I've been living in Paris. This is beginning of my 32nd year here in Paris. And I am a consultant, an educator, a speaker, and an author. And I have a consulting company where I help businesses in a variety of areas: staff development, staff education, professional development, program development, marketing communications, a variety of things. And I have a very long history in the industry. I've been with you all day today. So I was listening to everyone giving their introductions, and I thought I probably am the person that's been in the industry the longest, probably over 40 years. So that does give a little bit my age in there, a little bit. I was very young when I started. And just a couple highlights. I I started out as a Group X instructor, just so people know that. So when I'm talking today, they have that idea. I worked for Reebok France. I was hired actually as a member of the original Step Reebok team when they launched Step Aerobics in 1990. Had a long time with Reebok France, Reebok International. And I actually worked in Moscow for almost a year at Reebok Sports Clubs. I was the fitness and lifestyle director for Buddha Bar Spa here in Paris. And I have written a book as well about working in the international fitness industry. I am also on the board of directors of the American Council on Exercise, ACE. And I'm just happy to be here, happy to share with everybody today. So again, thanks.
Great, thanks, Fred. And Ian, do you want to take us off?
Certainly. Well, good evening, good afternoon, and thank you for the invite again, at the risk of repeating what others have said. So my name is Ian Mullane. I'm the CEO and founder of Keepme, which is an AI-powered sales and marketing platform. My background is actually fintech, predominantly in predictive analytics. I'm an economist from training, and behavioral economics is my main forte as such. But I have also been the owner of a well-known Singapore fitness gym called Vanda for just over 12 years until 2019. And it was actually the marriage of having that ownership and my interest in predictive analytics that's produced Keepme, which we now see across 13 countries. I have an interest, along with Mr. O'Rourke, who I have sparred with and spoken to a number of times, around the future and the direction of the industry. And I've published 2 white papers this year, the Future of Fitness, which is out in January, and the Data and AI one, which came out just a few weeks ago. So again, thank you very much for the invite.
Great, thanks guys. I'm very impressive background there from all of you. So thank you for joining us today. So to kick off, I think, a good place for us to start is kind of just reviewing what kind of changes we've seen in the industry the past year. So the pandemic has kind of fast forwarded a lot of those changes. So I'd just love to hear in each of your opinions, what has been the most impactful that you've seen affect the industry more long-term than anything. Fred, do you want to kick off?
Sure. I think the fitness industry had a good kick in the butt, actually, which is good for the industry in many different ways. And I actually say that in a positive way because I think it's making everyone move forward, and not just in digital, because I know everyone's talking right now about digital, and I am totally on board with that. But there's a whole other thing that I did see in the last panel that wasn't spoken about a lot, is that we tend to still preach to the choir, talk to the same people that are already working out, that like to work out, that want to try new activities, that you don't have to convince. And we really need to get to that 80%. And I think what happened was, even myself, because in Paris, we were in a very strict lockdown, and my gym, the gyms were closed. They just reopened about a month and a half ago after 8 months. That was the second shutdown, was finding other activities. And so people were doing out, myself, I was taking the share bikes we have here in Paris and getting my cardio workout with that, and working out in, back in my building where there's a little garden. And people were discovering other activities. And somewhere, some people will continue with those. They might want to come back to the gym, but again, we all know it's such an uncertain time, myself included. I went right back to the gym as soon as I could. But in answering your question, I think this kind of kick in the butt that I said was good, in that we're also going to learn how we need to reach out to that 80%, as well as the people that are already coming, and we want them to come back. But I feel sometimes that the focus is very narrow in who we're talking to, and that we need to reach out and we need to look at it more in a bigger picture of health, wellness, which we're not always doing. So, and changing programs around that. So I will let my fellow panelists speak, but I'll come back to some of that after.
Thank you, Fred. Bryan, do you want to shed some light your side?
Yeah, so the facts are we don't know what the implications of the last year are really going to be. We have some guesses. I think that, one of the concepts that have been brought up in the past, especially from Professor Scott Galloway, is this notion of dispersion, and the idea that, we've seen a great acceleration of dispersion in this industry and many others. And that's basically the notion of, making more and more businesses direct to consumer, in the sense that you're eliminating barriers, you're eliminating friction. That has good to it, because that means you can reach broader markets, along with what Fred was alluding to, which is good. People might bemoan Apple Fitness and some other platforms as being a threat, when the reality is all they're really going to do is grow the marketplace for exercise, which is really a good thing. But in the interim, there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of people who still cling to old mindsets about the industry in general. They're really not necessarily prepared to compete, and many people think that things are just going to go back to normal. We don't know the extent of that, but I don't think it's going to be the same. And I think that if you haven't already, which I'm sure many of the people participating today have been, hence why they come to these kind of events, if you're not already assessing and really getting your hands around strategy, how are you going to compete may be too late for you. And I think there needs to be a lot of honest assessment about where people who are in this business really sit and what they need to prepare for in the future. And that is not necessarily an easy answer. Of course, Ian's right. We'll talk about things like data and how you automate things and how you improve with predictive analytics. But it's just not about that. It's also about your human capital. It's about your basic business model and how you actually evaluate performance. So it's a long answer, so I apologize. I hope it was a good one.
It was, absolutely. Thank you. And Ian, your thoughts?
Well, I'm going to echo both Fred and Bryan to a degree here with an element of what I'd like to think is positivity. We've now, with the entrance of the digital players, got some of the finest consumer marketing organizations on the planet now working within our sector. And whether we want to kid ourselves or not, our penetration for years has been anemic, right, across the world. And now we've got an organization, as an example, Apple, which would be a good one here, with over 1 billion customers and 1.6 billion devices. This is an organization with that marketing capability who's going to introduce potentially cohorts of people that we've never, ever had an opportunity to get into, even if we brought it together. So I think that's my first point. Second point is, I think we need to brace ourselves for the fact that the consumer is more educated than they have possibly been before. And what I mean by that is we've all been barraged for the last 12 months with the media educating us around sleep, nutrition, stress, mental health, the wellness concept. And what that means is that we've now got an audience, probably again, that we weren't necessarily getting engaged previously, that want to engage with us. Now, we're not the holistic picture. We're not going to have the capacity as an industry to deliver all of those aspects, but we certainly can signal our intent to be involved and to also complement and supplement. So for all of the challenges, and Bryan's alluded to them, you know, we are going to see an element of Darwinian survival over the next 12 months. We've still got a lot of shocks coming. There's a few big names who just aren't going to make it. For all of that aside, I think the industry will come out stronger, probably with higher penetration, probably with better product, and probably giving better service.
Yeah, it's a great summary. I think, you know, the concept of shifting the mindset to being innovative and adaptive and agile is probably a key thing here, right? You know, not resting on your laurels and kind of waiting for people to come to you. But as you say, you know, people's mindsets now shifted. They're a lot more kind of clued up now about what they need to be doing, or maybe what they don't need to be doing. So yeah, I think, you know, nail on the head there. McConnell, what are you seeing from your side?
Yeah, no, and I think, you know, agree definitely with Bryan that I think a lot of it is still a little bit TBD and uncertain. But I think one of the biggest themes that we've kind of noticed is in conversations with brands as we've evaluated investments and things like that, is this just disruption to consumers' routines. And I think that the most obvious, the most talked about is obviously the shift to digital and connected and at-home fitness. But I think it really extends much more broadly than that. And you know, kind of looking at where people are living, you know, how frequently are they commuting? What time are they working out at? How have they gotten exposed to maybe new types of workouts? So even if you're going back and working out in person, you know, did you at least get exposure through some digital program to a new workout that now you're super excited about, and that's going to influence sort of how you're mapping out your new routine as things normalize a bit coming out of the pandemic. And you know, one of the things that I think we saw and you know, and through a lot of the consumer work that we've done is just, you know, consumers still have a preference for the in-person workout and that experience and the effectiveness of it. But I think that the impacts to brands on site selection and scheduling and how you design your units and your locations to incorporate and account for a lot of those changes before, you know, if people are suddenly only going downtown to you know, the financial district 3 days a week instead of 5, right? That, you know, do you still want to build a 4,000 square foot location, or do you start thinking about some smaller format? So I think a lot of the kind of second, third order impacts are still to be determined, but I think this idea of consumers' routines being really highly disrupted and there being an opportunity, this dislocation being an opportunity for a lot of brands to rethink their strategy a little bit, but also go out and capture and acquire and speak to market to a lot of these consumers that now are a bit up for grabs. I think that's one of the biggest themes that we're really seeing. And I don't think that is one that is short term, or I think that'll really be a more permanent shift.
Oh, that's interesting. Thank you. And I know we've kind of touched already, it was mentioned in a few intros, I think, on the place of tech within the fitness industry business. What do you think are the kind of opportunities and the challenges for kind of brick and mortars in integrating tech products into their businesses? Ian, do you maybe want to kick off this one?
I think an important aspect here is that a lot of what were the hurdles historically are, as time goes by, being replaced. And let me explain that comment. For us to be able to truly leverage the technology that's available today, we need to be able to free the data that's within the tools that we have within the businesses. And that hasn't always been an easy task because of the legacy platforms that have existed within the technology as itself. I think that what we're starting to see, as well as shall we say, an API-centric development schedule for most organizations, would be the first aspect. I think that what we're also seeing is that the consumer is also now being able to provide into this through their own utilization of wearables and those particular aspects. Clearly from where I stand, I always drive this technology point, but I want to make it relevant. Technology does not make the business successful. Technology is there to help the business leverage its primary asset, which is its product and its people. So, we still hear around the dogma about automation. Oh, you'll never see automation in a business, people first. It's never about putting the automation in to replace people. It's about making sure that things are done consistently and that the, shall we say, the more mundane aspects of day-to-day operations are handled automatically so that we can use the human capital for the purpose that we brought it into in the first place. So the only, if I want to give it a slight negative spin on here, is that the level of adoption within the sector is still relatively slow. We still celebrate that we can provide a mobile app. we are still in a consumer-led business, yet consumer technology in the sector is behind. But the last 12 months, we've seen more acceleration and acceptance of that fact than we had done in the previous 5 years. So whilst I say pessimistically, I'm actually very optimistic that what's happened is going to drive the future where we need it to go.
Great. I think that's a great roundup there. And Fred and Bryan, actually for both of you, I know you kind of touched on the data side of things first. How do you see that playing into the future of these businesses, the brick and mortars growing? I think as Ian's kind of nodded to, there's a little bit of reluctancy there to kind of embrace that, but how do you see that playing out?
Do you want me to go?
Yeah, Fred, you.
Hey, Bryan. Okay. Well, it was interesting because Ian said something about the level of adoption. And also, again, I do think these are positive changes that are going to be happening, but the industry is very slow to change and has always been slow to change. And as Bryan alluded to as well, kind of wants to go back to the way it was. And in terms of data management, everyone's talking about data. The problem is what I'm seeing right now is many people are collecting all this data and they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to interpret it. And a lot of people aren't even that interested, or they've got all these functionalities in their different software, and they're like, well, I don't really have the time to do that. I recently wrote an article and I talked about that, and the people came back to me and said, like, but most of our clubs right now are not actually measuring the data. And I was like, well, they need to. So that's one thing. I think that in terms of the question about tech, though, is every industry is using tech. It's not the future, it's now. It's just the way it is. So if it's a fitness industry, if it's the spa industry, if it's restaurants, if it's cars, whatever it is. And we just have to move forward with it. We cannot go back. And I think Ian just said something about people not even having a mobile app, etc. It's just, you need to look at what, one, your competitors are doing, but also what are your consumers doing? What is so interesting, I think, many times is that consumer behavior changes before the company's behavior or businesses. And so someone that's used to using an app to reserve their spot in a spin class somewhere, pay online, everything very easy, and then they go to another club because they moved, and you still have to come in and do paperwork. I mean, they're not going to go back. So I think just in general, the industry really needs to, as hard as it is, I'm not saying it's easy, make those steps to move forward and see what other industries are doing, see what other people in the fitness industry are doing in terms of tech. But it's not going away, and also learn as much as you can about data management. And even if you start at a really low level, just looking at geographics and demographics and not really going in depth, but learn how you can use it properly to enhance your business and your client's experience.
Thank you. I mean, I think off the back of that, Bryan, maybe you could expand on that a little bit. If you could maybe give some advice to someone who perhaps hasn't really delved into that side of the business yet. I think I'm very much getting a perspective through here that, unless people really embrace this moving forward, they're going to get left behind. How would you advise someone to kind of start out doing that?
Well, the reality is that in business in general, and we're talking about large companies, I mean, less than 10% of companies even have a real strategy. And, it's really about how do you want to compete. And technology, to the point of Ian and I think pretty much everybody here, that's just a tool. You have to decide what it is you're trying to create, user experience wise. What is the extent? If you're a legacy operator or you already have a business, you got to look at what is the customer really experiencing. You got to map that out, and then you have to ask yourself, how do you redesign that in a way that helps you drive revenue, things like personalization, for example, marketing, knowing cohorts, knowing different personas. That's one example of improving your revenue. Another, user experience is all about personalization, right? That's one example. So you really, and I think one of the things that happens, and we have quite a few people on this call, it varies quite a bit depending on the business model. The principles are the same, but depending on the business model, there are things to consider, right? One of the greatest in the US up to a few years ago, one of the great demonstrations of great technology and competition as a tool was SoulCycle, who really adopted a lot of things before they were really mainstream. And they were able to really leverage that and drive operating profitability to the highest in the industry at over almost 60% operating margin on each experience, which is tremendous. But it's not easy depending on the model. You really have to start from scratch and ask yourself, how am I competing? What really is the strategy we're trying to execute? Understanding the important KPIs around the business, which is another thing. A lot of folks in this industry space don't even understand what the important KPIs are. I'll give you an example. Retention is a worthless number. I won't get into that, but that's a great example versus things like, what is lifetime value of member? What is my cost of acquisition of member? What are the key variables that lead to longer term lifetime value? These kind of things. That is not part of the mainstay of conversation for a lot of brands. And then really, how are you going to use those technology tools to do what Ian described as far as automating fundamental tasks so that you can invest human capital at the points in time where it makes the biggest difference? And you can see great brands, whether it's Apple in retail or Four Seasons hotels, where, when I go to New York and stay at my Four Seasons, I don't have to talk to anybody. I can check into my room on the way in the car, go in there and already have my room service being delivered when I arrive. If I need to speak to somebody, they're Johnny on the spot, and at $550 a night, for a room, that's what you should expect. But luxury brands are doing this stuff, and they're creating experience that differentiates themselves and drives revenue by a very intelligent way of approaching the adoption of tech. And it is not human versus tech. And a lot of people still see that, and that's just not the way to think about it. So it's a complex thing. I mean, people really have to give a lot of thought to it. It's not just something that you're going to figure out on the back of a napkin in a couple days. You really have to spend time understanding and learning a lot of things before you come to the realization of what you should really do.
Absolutely, and couldn't agree more. I think you know, you've kind of got it bang on there regarding this contention between tech versus human, right? And it's actually more about how we can kind of create a hybrid model to optimize both, right? Using the tech to facilitate the better member experience at the end of the day. Look, you know, I think moving on, something that would be quite interesting to go over is kind of like the whole concept of fitness trends. You know, what are we seeing coming through, you know, moving into the near future? You know, I think especially Fred, you mentioned earlier that you know, you saw Reebok Step back in the day, and you've seen various different types of fitness concepts kind of come through you know, popular culture. What do you think is kind of going to be the next big thing or big concept? Fred, perhaps you want to take it first, given your Reebok days.
Step Reebok days, and since, well, that's a loaded question. I have a million thoughts going through my mind just from what everyone else has been talking about, and then that question. You know, people sometimes will ask me, you know, when I'm solicited for an article, for example, on the future of fitness, is it, how do you see fitness in 10 years? And I'm like, I don't even know what it's going to be like next year. You know, you can't think that far down the road. So in general, there'll be something that comes that's new and exciting. Emma Berry mentioned virtual reality. I think that's going to come into play. Actually, I talk about that in some of my presentations, because here in France, physical therapists are using virtual reality for rehabilitation. And so I do see the implications of that. That's just another part. Of course, AI is going to be, you know, a big player, but specific activities, I think it's hard to define. But one thing I wanted to mention, this might steer the conversation in a different direction, is that there's other players besides the Apples and the Googles coming in, which are things like in the US, CVS or Rite Aid, which are these huge pharmacies, and they're parapharmacies where you can buy everything there. And they're teaming up with Apple Fitness Plus and insurance companies like Aetna and AXA, who are doing these things. And so they're talking to people who are not getting, you know, haven't been getting fit. And those people, if they're just starting out in the industry, they're not looking for the next best thing. They're just looking to get going. And it might be some simple things, just as going back to walking programs and accessible exercise programs that maybe don't need a lot of equipment, that we need to look at. So I know that kind of opened up a Pandora's box, but I've had experience over the years. I remember one time going to a keynote, and the woman that was the keynote speaker was Leslie Sanson, who has become very famous and very rich doing walking programs. And she brought about 4 or 5 people that were successful with their programs who had been morbidly obese. And one of them literally said, and this completely changed the way that I thought about things. She said, I was sitting on my couch and Leslie said, all you have to do is stand up and walk. And she said, and that talked to me. And I think we still, unfortunately, are not talking, and I'm going back to that 80%, or probably even some of the people that come to the clubs that are afraid to try new activities, et cetera. So it's a big dilemma in a way. And I know the fitness industry has done an amazing job with a lot of people, but we have a lot more to do. So just to tie this up again, yes, there'll be some fantastic new activity that's going to come that everyone's going to jump on board, powered by AI or some other cool equipment and using tech. But I think also we got to look what other, you know, entities are doing and how they're engaging people to get fit. And we might have to take a step back as well and see some of the basic exercise modalities that are being used that we can touch more people with, and then move them forward and move the industry forward. There you go. That was long-winded.
Thank you. No, that's really, really interesting, and especially hearing the kind of teeing up of insurance companies, for example.
Well, just one quick thing, and then I'll let my fellow panelists speak. For example, I know, I think it's Lifetime Fitness teamed up with Apple Plus, giving all of their members. So I think also there's a big opportunity for companies to come together and work together, maybe not try to reinvent the wheel. And when you've got something that works, why not work with companies and you can both move forward together and move the industry and get people healthy.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe perhaps a message to kind of really emphasize there, you know, not seeing, and I know it's come up a few times now, but not seeing these kind of big tech giants as threats, but more as opportunities, right? And tapping into all the resource and everything that they have, rather than trying to compete against them. Great, thank you. McConnell, just be interesting to hear from your side, you know, what, if you agree, for starters, but, you know, if there's anything else that you're seeing, you know, from an investor side as kind of being upcoming trends or concepts.
No, totally. And you know, again, being on the investor side, if I knew what exactly was coming next, I probably would go do it myself. So we have the luxury of sitting back and letting other smarter people do that, and then making decisions based on that. But you know, I think a couple of areas that have been really interesting for us, where we're spending time, is I think you know that the fitness consumers are really smart, and you know, not everything needs to be like crazy scientific or revolutionary, but they do their research and they want to know that they're spending their time, especially as time becomes an increasingly valuable commodity, that they're spending their time on things that are going to be really effective. And you look at something like an Orange Theory, and you know, they rode the backs of a lot of the emerging science and hit and you know, got a really strong understanding that, hey, this actually is a very effective workout. And obviously Orange Theory went out and executed and did an amazing job building that, but a lot of it really started with that sort of emerging science behind that. And so I think a couple areas that are somewhat related, that kind of play on that a little bit. I think the first one is a little around kind of programming and training. And I think one of the things that we've seen is, you know, the brands that are able to take elements of some professional grade service equipment product, and sort of consumerize those have been really effective. So look at what like Therabody is doing with their partnerships with all of these professional sports teams and athletes and things like that. And I think they get a lot of validation from consumers because you get that message of, hey, this is good enough for Cristiano Ronaldo, it's good enough for you. So I think that of how do you take more kind of professional grade training, equipment, programming, and incorporate that into fitness routines. I think the other thing that you're seeing is, and this is somewhat tied to like the, you know, the CrossFit phenomenon, is consumers now realize that like it's not necessarily ideal to go 100% intensity 100% of the time. And so are there ways to sort of work out smarter, maybe not at the same crazy level of intensity, but that takes, I think, a level of sophistication around programming that I guess an interesting opportunity. And I think kind of the enhanced access to technology really optimizes our ability to do that, right? Through heart rate monitors and sleep data, nutrition data, things like that, where you can really get very granular on what's truly effective. The secondary, and again, this is somewhat related, but we've been spending a lot of time around the recovery space. So not strictly fitness, but I think very highly fitness adjacent. And again, consumers just now more than ever know that what they do outside of the gym is just as, if not more important to their overall health, wellness, and fitness. And I think you've really started to see consumers take a lot of steps to really invest behind taking care of their bodies, recovering. You see the emergence of these cryotherapy businesses and these infrared sauna businesses and things like that, where it's this kind of intersection of technology and professional grade equipment and training and services, meeting someone who's able to sort of scale that and build it in a more consumer friendly, consumer facing brand. So those are a couple that again, I think are super interesting right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And I think, you know, definitely touching on the concept of like celebrity endorsement and the marrying up of professional grade tools could be an interesting one to watch for sure. Something I'm just going to open one out, a rogue question to the panel, and whoever's got an opinion on it, feel free to pipe up. But certainly through my background working in startups and scale ups and kind of consumer brands, a lot of them being in health and wellness, I wonder if any of you kind of think that there may be a place in which brands, especially the big tech giants, start to shift to more of a kind of full lifetime exercise program for, you know, from child through to early adult, through to perhaps if you're a female, like pregnancy, post-pregnancy, all that kind of stuff, through to the older generation as well. Because I know the older generation of, you know, kind of exercising, especially I think over the past year, has come to like more. Do you think there's ever going to be a place for that somewhere along the line where we kind of integrate wearables and it becomes a really personalized kind of lifetime?
That's what Apple's doing. They're not in the fitness business, they're in the health business. So that's exactly what they're doing, right?
Yeah,
I've got every expectation, Alexandra, that is, I mean, that to me would have been my number one trend that we will see, which is the increasingly personalized, prescribed exercise. But I want to move that one stage up and say prescribed wellness. When I arrive in the gym, I arrive in a variety of states. Some nights I may have had longer nights than I should have done, probably through work. Some days I don't get the sleep I may have needed. So when I turn up, the actual workout I do should actually be driven by my condition. And nowadays, you know, with the 100-odd million watches which Apple has sold, and the fact that we carry more physiological data on our mobile phone than a sports scientist had access to 5 years ago, we're in a situation where we've got that capability. And I think that we're going to see, and I think we did with Equinox when they did their partnership very recently as well, we're getting to a stage now where organizations are going to start leveraging the data that the customers have to be able to prescribe. Even at the most level, if my PT reviewed my Whoop recovery for the previous 24 hours, we could decide whether we're going to push on a PB or whether we're going to concentrate on form and recovery. That type of data currently is locked in devices, it's locked in Apple Health, Google Fit, and all of the rest of the stuff. But we are already starting to see consolidators, tools that will be accessible to large franchisees and single operators. They'll be able to take this down with member permissions, and that should allow them to craft the experience regardless of what stage they're at.
I completely agree with both of you, Brian and Ian. I have a couple other thoughts on this. For example, just giving Apple as the example, which Brian talked about, I completely agree. But what I expect to see is that they're going to open clubs. You know, they're going to attach a club to the Apple Store. That type thing is already starting to happen. Or, for example, you see something bringing it down very simple, a company like Lululemon, who allows people to do yoga classes in store. Here in Paris, for example, my telephone internet provider, Orange, I got an email and they were proposing these master classes with fitness people in their store. So you're going there and then you're probably getting an offer to get like a new phone or get some discount. And you're seeing that happen. And even when I talked earlier about the CVS or Rite Aid, and for people who are not from the States, these big parapharmacies, I expect to see that as well. And I've seen here in France, Decathlon, which is also a store that sells all kinds of sports equipment. They've opened up a club inside there. So then what Ian said, taking the data and then again, looking at it from a wellness perspective. I mean, I think some of these companies have that idea. They might not have the know-how yet, but I totally agree with that because it's not just the fitness part of it. And one thing that I was thinking about with the CVS's and the Rite Aids, et cetera, people go to them as well because they trust their pharmacist, for example. So right now you're talking about the vaccines, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we should be talking about that. Everyone's talking about COVID in the health clubs and saying, we're the best for your immunity, you know, and okay, but let's talk about the big picture. And again, the health clubs are only getting to 20% of the people. So that other message, how are you getting to the 80%? And those companies like the CVS, the Rite Aids, all that, and then teaming up with even simple, you know, trackers, It doesn't have to be super sophisticated in the beginning. So I think the industry needs to look at that and again, stop being so kind of narrow focused, because I do think there's a lot of opportunities. So to spin it into a positive thing, I do. I think there's huge potential going forward. But looking back to just, your club's going to be the way it was pre-COVID, and we're not out of COVID, is just not, I think, the way to go. We need to move forward. So another one of my tirades. There you go.
Thanks, guys. Okay, so I think, just to round this off, it would be really great just to hear from each of you, like one thing, if you could pick, I'm sure there's lots of things, but if you could pick one thing to really highly advise like a fitness operator to invest, to enable them to innovate, to really kind of basically scale out the next few years, right? And go with the flow of the technological changes that are here and coming, what would you advise? Ian, do you want to kick off?
Yes, okay, but I'm not going to suggest anything. I'm actually going to suggest, just Bryan, don't look so surprised. I wasn't going to be as obvious as you thought I was going to be there. Apart from buy Glofox, everybody. Did I not mention that? I mean, that would be a brilliant start for all the guys. But I'm going to suggest just start to build an awareness of what is available. Start to build an interest. No longer see it as a threat. See it as an opportunity. Currently, you can see it as a competitive advantage. In the future, technology is going to be a competitive necessity. With that in mind, look to who's going to have responsibility within the business to drive it forward. To Bryan's point, there's very little strategic thought given to this. Predominantly, the CTOs in many fitness companies do more support of Microsoft Word than they do at looking at any business intelligence. So why don't we, as a sector, embrace the opportunities that are coming forth, at least be informed, at least have an understanding of what the capacities are? Because even when I engage in conversations now, the thoughts of 12 months ago, even my own thoughts of 12 months ago, many times are redundant now because things are moving on at such a pace. My fear is that this industry delivers to its community an incredibly valuable service that needs to continue. And for that to happen, it needs to start looking at how it can produce a product and merge it with its community capabilities that the consumer is going to want to associate with. And in the days where I can get personalization and my own level of community from Peloton or from Apple Fitness Plus, then if I can do that, then I, as an operator, need to start engaging with technology so that I can start showing that I have those capabilities so that I can continue retaining and hopefully operate. Great,
thanks, Ian. Bryan, do you want to take the next spot?
Yeah, so, this is the end, it's about strategy. And before I tell you what I would think I wanted, a piece of advice would be about what to do, a takeaway. First off, be mindful of the fact of the hype cycle. A lot of what we're talking about is very similar to what was going on around the year 2000 with the dot-com bust. And right now we're in an anomaly world where companies are highly overvalued. We're awash in a lot of money that is historically unprecedented. So there's a lot of noise. It doesn't mean that the underlying themes that we're talking about are not real. But just like Elon Musk convincing people we're going to have self-driving cars by now, typically the technology takes a little longer to adopt. And that's why it's really important more than ever that you have a real strategy. And that is not something, when you're not doing it regularly, that people are really adept at doing. So what I'd recommend is you get to Rita McGrath, who's a professor at Columbia. You can go to YouTube. Watch content on 2 of her books. Number 1 is The End of Competitive Advantage, and the other one more recently is Seeing Around Corners. And the reason these are great books is they give you very specific case studies of how businesses and industries reinvented themselves by rethinking, like changing their mindsets and becoming more strategic. Because if you don't do that, and that's not easy to do, it gets very hard to adopt things like Fred's saying, or any of our panelists, Ian or McConnell. it's very easy for us to opine about this, but if you and your DNA cannot grasp what strategy is and how to do it, we could tell you personalization and data, we could tell you all kind of things. It's not going to really help you because everything's going to constantly be changing. So if you're not changing your mindset, it's going to be very difficult for you to be successful.
I think that's a very fair perspective there, Bryan. Thank you. McConnell, what are your thoughts?
I'll be a little less strategic than the other guys, maybe a little more tactical. I think I totally agree with everything that they're saying, though. Yeah, I think for us, one of the things that we've kind of advocated for a lot of our brands or some of the businesses that we've kind of met with is, kind of, I think, know what you can do internally and what your kind of core competencies are as it relates to technology, and know what you need to just partner with folks on. And I think investing a lot of time in sort of building your own proprietary apps and software and systems, for some folks that may work, but I think for a lot of brands there's a lot of good solutions out there, and so kind of taking the time and figuring out, okay, what systems do I want to build, what platforms do I want, but also being mindful of not overcomplicating it. I think that, because there are so many options, you can go a little bit crazy, and kind of others have raised it, like there's still a very heavy people component when it comes to technology. So any good system, even the best system, is not going to solve all your issues. So buy and invest in a couple really good systems that are going to get you the right data visibility and ability to work with that data. And then invest in building a team that can actually leverage that data. I think we've almost never regretted, hiring and investing and paying for good data people. And because it just becomes such a huge point of leverage for the entire organization. And if you're really making decisions that are data driven, it holds everyone accountable. There's a single point of truth, and you can move much more quickly, whether it's making more good decisions or moving off of bad decisions more quickly when you've got the right people and the right systems. But also recognizing that it really does take both. There's not a silver bullet out there that's gonna do everything for you.
Absolutely. Thank you, McConnell. And Fred, do you want to round us off with your last thoughts?
I think you did that on purpose. I'm not sure. I'm happy to. First of all, I agree with all of my fellow panelists. And so it's some of the things that I probably would have talked about a little bit too. I'm going to take a different approach. One is, obviously people need to invest in digital in general. So they need to at least look what their budgets are going to be coming forward, even if they don't know what they need right now, but they've got to make, like Bryan said, strategic planning, etc. Very, very, general. Also look at trends that you're seeing with other businesses, other industries, learn from them and from your competitors. Another thing is that one little specific thing that I think people if you have a personal training business, if you have clubs, whatever I happen to like chatbots. I like the little virtual assistants. I think they're really easy to implement, and they can make your customer service much more efficient. So I recommend people to just look into that, because I use them for, with Air France or my bank or whatever it be. And they're becoming a lot more sophisticated. They're not that expensive to put in. So those little virtual assistants that can help you with repetitive questions that people want to know your hours and where you're located and all the stuff that you don't need a person to be doing that. And I will end that going to the overall subject of customer service, because I think that's extremely important in our industry. And sometimes people are only looking at delivering, for example, these options with digital, et cetera, but they have to look at what is happening. And someone in an earlier panel talked about omni-channel. Omni-channel is not just delivery of, how they can get access to you, but it's also where are they communicating? Are they on social media? Are they writing to you on your website and an email, on your Apple Watch, whatever? And customer service sometimes gets lost. And what I've seen in our industry many times during COVID is that there's been this big push for cleanliness. And it's all about, we have gel at every station. And well, for me, it's like your business should be clean to begin with. I mean, that's something that is to me normal. Okay, you can be talking about what you're doing specifically for the COVID, restrictions or precautions, but those are some of the things to me that's not a great marketing tool, because it's basically saying like, well, finally our club is clean, So customer service in general, I believe, and let me just say this, I don't have a club, and I feel for my industry and the people that suffered. So I know this is not easy. I don't want to make it sound like, oh yeah, do this, do that. But I do think sometimes we need to step back and take a look at all the things that we've talked about today, and sometimes even move backwards to move forward, instead of just trying to get, like people were saying earlier today, throwing stuff up on the web and, but again, the last statement I'll say is that I do think there's a lot of positivity in what's been going on, moving us forward. And there's a lot of opportunity for the industry. Robots are not going to take over. They're going to create other jobs. And we need to embrace that. There you go.
Fantastic. Thank you, Fred. And thank you to Bryan, Ian, and McConnell as well. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks. Right, that's the end of our session today. So, just round off to say a last few thank yous. So to all our panelists, I know we've had a lot today. Thank you for taking the time to join us and add your really valuable contributions. I'm sure everyone within the audience has appreciated all the different perspectives and learnings that have been brought to light today. And also thank you to our customer insights guests as well, hearing your personal journeys, your challenges, and also, your wins has been fascinating, I'm sure, for lots of people. And then lastly, our audience, thanks for turning up. It wouldn't have worked without you guys. So thank you for bearing with us. And yeah, it's just been a great opportunity to connect in a time that has been incredibly isolating for a lot of people. So thanks for coming together. We're definitely going to be trying to kind of really build the community out from this moving forward. So stay tuned. We'll be in touch. And yeah, we'll be in touch to send you the recording of the event today and also post the winners of our various prizes. So we'll put that out on social tomorrow. But otherwise, thanks guys. Have a great day, morning, evening, wherever you are in the world. And yeah, look forward to seeing you hopefully in person before too long.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Alex, thanks all the Glofox team for setting this up. So well done, everyone.